Linda was a young woman who had grown up as an orphan. She lived in a small apartment that her parents had left for her. Though she had no family to care for her, she never felt lonely because she was deeply in love with herself. Linda was breathtakingly beautiful. Her smooth skin, bright eyes, and perfect figure made her the kind of woman that turned heads everywhere she went. She knew how beautiful she was, and she never got tired of admiring herself. Every morning, she would stand in front of the mirror, turning from side to side, smiling at her reflection. She would run her hands over her hair, pose like a model, and whisper to herself, "Wow, I am truly stunning." Whenever Linda stepped outside, men couldn't help but stare at her. Some would stop in their tracks, others would nudge their friends and whisper, "Look at that beauty." Many men gathered the courage to approach her, hoping to win her heart. They would tell her how much they admired her, how they dreamed of making her their wife. But Linda never took any of them seriously. She looked down on them and spoke to them with disrespect. She would roll her eyes and say, You want to marry me? Do you even have money? Before you come to me, make sure your pockets are full of cash. I am too beautiful to marry a poor man." She mocked men who didn't dress well. If a man wore simple clothes, she would laugh and say, "Look at you. Do you think you can impress me with that cheap outfit?" If a man tried to express his feelings, she would cut him off. "Please, don't waste my time. You are not on my level." Linda's arrogance didn't stop with men. She disrespected everyone, young and old. She talked to people as if they were beneath her. If an elderly person greeted her, she barely responded. If a neighbor needed help, she ignored them. She never smiled at anyone unless she saw a reason to benefit from them. Though many admired her beauty, they also feared her attitude. People whispered about her behind her back. "She may be beautiful," they said, "but her heart is full of pride." But Linda didn't care. To her, the world was full of unworthy people, and she was above them all. She had no idea that life was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. One bright afternoon, Linda was walking down the road, swaying her hips confidently as she strutted in her high heels. She wore an expensive dress that hugged her body perfectly, and her long, shiny hair bounced with each step. Heads turned as usual, and she smiled to herself, enjoying the attention. As she walked, an old woman standing by the roadside watched her carefully. The woman was dressed in a simple wrapper and a faded blouse, her feet bare and dusty from the journey she had walked. Something about Linda's attitude troubled her, and she felt the need to speak up. She stepped forward and gently reached for Linda's hand. "My daughter," the old woman said with kindness in her voice, "I stopped you because I care for you. I see that you are very beautiful, but beauty alone is not enough. Please, my child, stop being arrogant to people. Arrogance will do you no good. It will only lead you to a life of regret." Linda pulled her hand away, frowning. But the old woman continued, "Listen to me, my child. Be humble. Speak kindly to people, for you never know who will help you tomorrow. Never insult others. A lady should be gentle and respectful. The world will admire a woman who carries herself with grace, not one who looks down on others. It will pay you to be kind, my child." Linda's expression changed from surprise to anger. She placed her hands on her waist, narrowed her eyes, and shouted, "Who do you think you are, old hag? How dare you stop a beautiful lady like me to tell me such nonsense? Do you know who I am? Do you know how many men beg for my attention? Please, never in your miserable life stop me on the road to say this rubbish again. If you ever try such a thing again, you will regret it." The old woman looked at Linda with deep sadness. Her heart ached, not because of the insult, but because she had wanted to help the young lady see the truth. With a heavy sigh, the woman turned and walked away, shaking her head. "What a pity," she muttered to herself. "I only wanted to help her, but instead she insulted me. Well, since words cannot teach her, maybe life will. Perhaps it is time for her to learn a lesson she will never forget." She stopped and looked up at the sky, her wrinkled face filled with determination. "Beauty fades, but character remains," she whispered. "I will make sure she understands that before it is too late." Linda, unaware of what was about to happen, tossed her hair over her shoulder and continued walking proudly, believing she had put the old woman in her place. But she had no idea that her life was about to take a drastic turn. The next day, Linda stepped out of her apartment, dressed in her finest outfit. She wore high heels that clicked against the pavement, and her confidence was as strong as ever. As usual, men turned to look at her, their eyes filled with admiration. Some whistled, others called out, "Beautiful lady, please stop and talk to me." But Linda ignored them. She walked proudly, swaying her hips, feeling like the most important person in the world. But just as she reached the middle of the road, something strange happened. The same old woman appeared before her, standing right in her path. Linda's eyes widened in shock. "You again?" she sneered. "Haven't you learned your lesson? I told you never to stop me again." The old woman did not argue. She simply raised her hand, pointed at Linda, and spoke in a firm voice. "Since you refuse to listen, let your beauty be taken away. From now on, let the world see the true reflection of your heart." Before Linda could respond, she felt a strange sensation wash over her. A sudden dizziness took over, and her vision blurred. The world around her spun for a moment, and then, silence. The men who had been admiring her gasped in horror. Their eyes, once filled with admiration, now held fear and disgust. Some of them screamed, others ran away. Linda, confused by their reactions, placed her hands on her hips and scoffed. "What is wrong with all of you?" she said, rolling her eyes. "Haven't you seen a beautiful woman before?" But what Linda didn't know was that something terrible had happened to her. Her once perfect face had turned into the head of a goat. Her smooth, radiant skin had become rough, wrinkled, and covered in sores. Her beautiful, curvy body had transformed into something ugly and unrecognizable. Yet, in her arrogance, she continued walking, thinking she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. "That old fool again," she muttered to herself. "She is not okay at all. She just appeared and wasted my time." But as she walked through the streets, she noticed something strange. No man called out to her anymore. No one admired her beauty. Instead, people stared at her with wide eyes. Some whispered, and others turned away in fear. Still unaware of her transformation, she went home, confident that nothing had changed. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Linda began to notice something. No man ever stopped her again. The men who used to beg for her attention now avoided her. Some even crossed the road when they saw her coming. She began to feel lonely. The attention she once enjoyed had vanished. She looked at herself in the mirror, but to her eyes, she still looked beautiful. She couldn't understand why people acted so strangely around her. Years passed, and Linda remained alone. She grew older, still walking proudly as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world, but she never married. No man ever approached her again. The arrogance that had once defined her had now become her curse. And so, Linda lived and died alone, never knowing that her own pride had destroyed her life. Moral lessons. 1. Beauty fades, but character lasts forever. No matter how beautiful you are, a bad attitude will always make people turn away from you. 2. Pride goes before a fall. When you look down on others, life will eventually humble you. 3. Kindness and humility are more attractive than physical beauty. A kind and respectful heart will take you further in life than just a pretty face. 4. Respect everyone, no matter their status. You never know who might change your life for the better, or teach you a lesson. Final words to my viewers. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. I hope you have learned something valuable today. Always be kind, always be humble, and remember, true beauty comes from within. See you in the next story.